Each year, our League of Women Voters, ABC, recognizes a person or organization who has been of extraordinary help to us in fulfilling our mission. This year's award goes to TJ Tronson and North Metro TV. So well deserved, and as Mary Jo explained, she painted this specifically for TJ based on knowing that he is an expert drone pilot and is very familiar with this area since he used it in his photography. He often has a view from on high with the drone. The painting also reads, TJ Tronson and North Metro TV are important and reliable community partners who inform citizens each election season, produce professional, widely viewed forums, enable voters to see and hear candidates, and went the extra mile for ABC in 2022. We present to TJ Tronson and North Metro TV staff the Friend of League Award 2023. TJ, we admire and appreciate your important community work more than we can say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That is beautiful. That was taken off of Wargo Nature Center, actually. I took that drone flight. Well, on behalf of myself and North Metro TV, thank you for this honor. It's always a great privilege to work with you guys. Thank you.
League of Women Voters, Anoka, Blaine, Coon Rapids area welcomes you to this conversation about 2023 Minnesota legislation regarding education and environment. Sharing their perspectives will be Senator Jim Abler, who represents Senate District 35, including Anoka, Coon Rapids, and parts of Andover, and Representative Zack Stephenson, who represents House District 35A, including Anoka and part of Coon Rapids. I'm Linda Rogers, a member of the League of Women Voters ABC and your moderator for the evening, along with fellow member Kathy Tinglestead. She's off camera gathering questions submitted on Zoom. Those of you participating in Zoom, please mute. This conversation is part of our ongoing series of programs featuring topics of interest to residents in the North Metro area. Welcome, Senator Abler and Representative Stephenson, and thank you for making time to talk with us. We're focusing this conversation on the topics of education and environment because they're closely tied to ABC's priorities. We'll begin with Senator Abler sharing his perspective on 2023 legislation regarding education. He'll have 5 minutes, followed by Representative Stephenson sharing his perspective on education legislation.
Well, thanks, and thanks for having me, and nice to be back again. I think I'm still a member. I'm not sure if I paid my dues lately, but I think I have the award for being one of the slowest but well-intended payers. And I want to thank the League for what you do, encouraging citizen involvement at so many levels, and this chance for a bit of a conversation. I think that it was $2.7 or $2.9 billion, so we'll have to talk about $500 million a minute to cover everything that you want to cover. There are a few things that touch as many families and our state as does education, and what it, from the ground up, from early ages through preschool and into school, and then even beyond. And I think a good deal of the members here find that lifelong education is really important. And I think the zeal for that starts at a young age. And for those who were hoping that something went down on the early education, quite a bit did. There's some very solid funding for many early education programs, particularly those that are center-based. Unfortunately, still the home-based ones are just languishing as a result of COVID and reimbursement rates and so on. And while the center numbers are increasing and the amount of slots there are increasing, and there's some opportunities to get some grants to get more of those, we have had just a great retrenchment in the home-based ones, and the literally tens of thousands of slots, which is really too bad. And I don't know that what was done about that will make a lot of difference there, but that's still a really important thing, particularly for greater Minnesota, but even our area, but in greater Minnesota, it's a big deal. There's a lot of controversy. I don't know if you were paying attention. Zach and I are very collegial. We agree on many things, like it should rain, and that we think education is important. How we would spend education money might be, I don't know how he'll let us know, but this was probably the biggest single funding time for education ever. And frankly, I think it could have been a lot better with a little more collaboration and working across the aisle. One of those poems about what I learned I needed to in kindergarten, from my life. So I totally screwed up that topic. But anyway, the things I needed to know I learned in kindergarten: working together, pick up your own messes, respect your neighbor, all that stuff. It was a very, at least in the Senate, it was a very non-collaborative year. I tried really hard with the Senate leads and so on to talk about things and actually work to improve education for the district as well as others. Anoka-Hennepin still is the largest. And frankly, the way it worked out with 4% of the formula, which is a big number, and then 2% for the second year, and then 2 to 3% ongoing in the base with inflation, sounds like a lot of money. But there were a lot of things that were added in that actually cost the districts money. And that's going to be actually quite diluted, more than people would think. And so with only 5 minutes, I can't go into a lot of detail. Maybe Zach and I will just kind of work our way through some of that. But I would have rather see more money go on the formula. And we proposed, I'm trying to even be political. This is just like, how do you make it work? And unfortunately, so many things become political, and like, why? Caring about kids reading, caring about kids doing math, caring about safety in schools is something on all of our minds. And I'm on the Education and Policy Committee, and we really didn't spend a lot of time talking about that, although I wish we would have. Because school violence is a big issue in one of the schools, at least multiple schools around. The teachers are afraid to be in the hallway doing hall duty out of fear, and we didn't talk about that. And so how do we get teachers to want to be teachers when they're afraid to even go to the halls? And, and this whole issue about school resource officers didn't have to be any issue at all. It would have just taken a simple conversation with the people involved, the cities, the school districts, and law enforcement, to find a way to make sure that no child is abused by anybody, but yet make sure people feel safe. And that's become political. I don't even know why that is. We want kids to be safe, and we trust our law enforcement there. So at the end of the day, the dust is going to settle on the largest investment of education, and money-wise, it was a great success. But I'm nervous about how that, for the money that's put there, and some of the programming that was set up using a lot of one-time money, how it's going to actually be able to carry forward. So I don't know how close I am to 5 minutes, but is there a timer somewhere, or am I just supposed to quit? Oh, okay. Well, I was looking. Usually the person in the front row is the timer, so I was waiting for, and she's holding a paper. I thought, well, I'm going to see 30 seconds pretty soon. Anyway, so thank you.
Thank you, Senator Abler. Representative Stephenson, your take on education legislation in 2023.
Well, 2023 was absolutely a historic session in many ways, but particularly with education. And I think Senator Abler and I both agree that Minnesotans care a great deal about education. In fact, I would argue that education is what makes Minnesota such a great place to be. We're able to have the amazing quality of life because we have phenomenal schools and because we've made those investments. But in the last 20 years or so, we've really been coasting and riding on our laurels. In fact, I graduated from Coon Rapids High School in 2002, and before this year, state funding for education, when you adjust for inflation, was actually lower than it was when I graduated from high school in 2002. We made substantial progress in reversing that trend, which has had disastrous consequences for Minnesota. Senator Abler mentioned the huge increase in the peer pupil formula, which will enable smaller class sizes. It'll enable us to recruit and retain teachers and really improve the educational experience for students. We also made a historic investment in special education funding. For a long time, the state has required special education treatment, as they definitely should, but we haven't paid for it. And so we've stuck local taxpayers with the cost of doing that. And we made a historic investment in getting rid of what insiders call the special education cross subsidy. It's just another way for saying we didn't pay for it, and now we're going to pay for it. We also made a new huge investment in kids being able to eat, which is phenomenal. Starting this fall, every child in Minnesota is going to get breakfast and lunch at school. Kids don't learn when they're hungry. Anyone who's a teacher knows the experience of having kids in their classroom who are not doing well because they're hungry. And I've already been hearing from teachers around the area about what a difference this has made in their classrooms to have kids have food. And in Minnesota in 2023, we can make sure that every kid who's going to school isn't going hungry, and that's exactly what we're doing. Also at a time when, unfortunately, around the country, there's a lot of conversations about banning books. We made investments in putting more books in our schools by putting more money into school libraries. And we also put money into making sure that kids can read those books by making historic investments in literacy programs and changing the structure around how we teach reading to match up with the science of what we now know is the most effective way to teach reading. And the last thing, and Senator Abler mentioned this, is that we made sure that a lot of the gains that we made this year will persist into the future by tying future levels of education funding to inflation. So if you think about what I said at the beginning about how education funding is actually less now than it was when I graduated from high school because of inflation, we're not going to continue down that path because we made clear that as the state makes its budget, we have to prioritize education and at least fund it at the level of inflation.
Thank you, Representative Stephenson. And now we had allowed 5 minutes for you to talk amongst yourselves, so to speak. If there's a conversation you'd like to have in front of this crowd about education legislation, you have 5 minutes for that.
Should we talk more about how great the education bill was?
It was simply amazing. Well, and so I'll just make a minute comment or so, and then Zach can go. And so, you know, if Zach and I could have been allowed to take that money and spend it, I think you would find it to be even more impressive for what comes. Unfortunately, it seems like the way you measure education success is how much did we spend. And you need to spend money. And I have been a proponent of spending money in education for a good long time, consistently since the beginning of my time in office. But you also have to know what are you going to get for that. And so COVID was really devastating on so many of the classes. And we have lost ground in reading and math in particular. And even some students don't know how to behave in school. Not even the older ones who are acting out, but some of the younger ones who really haven't had the experience of sitting still and not being in front of a monitor. And so there's a lot of ways to solve things if you can actually talk to each other and work it through. And so we'll see about how it goes. And I'm all about every student succeeding. And whatever you think about private schools and other non-traditional opportunities, 80% of the kids are going to wind up going to school in a traditional public school. We have to find a way to make sure they succeed. And education is in the Constitution as one of the duties of the state. And I fully support that, and I'm eager to see how it can work. And go ahead, Zach, you can.
Well, yeah, you know, I absolutely agree that we, if we look at our test scores, and not just test scores, I mean, you talk to any teacher, any parent, I got 2 school-age kids, and they'll tell you how bad the pandemic was for kids. The kids are not okay. Mental health of young people is really at a crisis level, and I think that we are still transitioning at the schools out of that crisis moment in the pandemic. And that's a real, we agree on that. And you know, Jim and I are probably going to say a lot we agree, probably more than people expect from a Democrat and a Republican. But I do agree that that's a huge problem. And I think we made some really positive steps on that. I think, you know, you mentioned the reading scores. I think that we may look back at this education bill and say the most important thing we did was change the way we teach reading in our schools. And this was a bipartisan effort around switching from the old way we're teaching reading back to actually something that's how I learned to read and it's how you learned to read, phonics.
Phonics.
Right? And that's now we call it the science of reading or something else, but we had gone away from that. And not just in Minnesota, by the way. This was something that's happened all across the country. People moved away from phonics, but it's very clear now, there's a scientific consensus that phonics is the best way to teach kids how to read. And so we're moving back in that direction, which I think will pay dividends, you know, maybe not on next year's test scores, but over the long run. And for Minnesota, a state that, you know, let's face it, you know, companies aren't here because this is the cheapest place to work, and they're not here because the weather's particularly good in January, and they're not here because there's oil in the ground. They're here for the people. We have the best workforce in the country, a highly educated, highly skilled workforce, and that's what allows companies like 3M and Medtronic and all of these companies to grow and prosper and thrive here. And that's not something that just happens, it's something that we have to keep making. And we haven't been for a while. We haven't been investing in that, and we did this year, and I think that that's really positive for Minnesota.
Yeah, and just one thing else to mention, and I'm an optimist. I try to be positive. I'm trying to, you know, I have so many concerns about how things went, so I'm trying to still spin it as, you know, positively as I can. But one thing that we have to continue to address is the teacher shortage. Mm-hmm. Actually, we have a shortage of everybody. Mm-hmm. But teachers in particular are pretty critical for the classroom. And so there's a lot, it's like the weather, we talk about it, but it's hard to do a lot about it. And so why do teachers not want to teach? There's a zillion reasons. And the way to resolve it is simply to listen to teachers, but listen to people who were going to be teachers, who aren't going to be teachers, who are quitting before they hit their 5th year. And challenges like that. There was a program that actually got changed, which allowed people to kind of apprentice their way into being a teacher. They had a degree from something that was called Tier 2. And that had attracted, and teachers of color is a concern. People over and over said, I want a teacher who looks like me. I wouldn't want, you don't want a teacher who looks like me. You want one, anyway. But you want one that looks like whatever. So that program was greatly truncated, and I was really disappointed about that. Of all the ways we've gotten more teachers of color in, it was through this Tier 2 thing, which somehow ran afoul of some political thing, and it was actually working. So anyway, so that's working together, you can get a lot done. When you sit on one side or the other and just don't listen to everybody, it's not going to be as good. I hope that what Zach said is correct, that all those good things happen, because it's really important.
Thanks to both of you. And Representative Stephenson, now we're going to switch gears and focus on environmental legislation this past session. What is your perspective on that?
Well, not to be a broken record, but it was a historic session for the environment. But I mean, it really was. That's not just a cliche. It's not just a slogan. I don't know how you could deny that this was a historic session in any number of different ways, but on the environment. And one thing I don't know that has gotten a lot of publicity these days are the investments that were made in our environment, in our parks, our trails, our fish nurseries, the infrastructure that enables us to preserve the wondrous outdoors of Minnesota and for Minnesotans to engage with it. A lot of that infrastructure had fallen into substantial disrepair from underinvestment for decades. We invested $600 million in one-time money. We had a lot of money on the surplus this year. It was not money that we could count on year in, year out. It was kind of one-time money, and I thought a fabulous use of that was investing in our environment and our great outdoors. So many people in this community in particular tell me when I'm out door knocking, the reason why they love living in Minnesota, and particularly in the North Metro, is that they can go out to the lakes and woods and enjoy everything Minnesota has to offer. So we made huge investments there. We also made a lot of changes to ensure that Minnesota's environment stays protected. I think I know that a lot of people in this room are very focused on the issue around PFAS, and we did enact a ban on PFAS. We were nation leading in our approach to these chemicals that once they're out, they stay in the environment forever. They've been found in the Arctic, they've been found in the blood of children, they're everywhere, and we know that they're carcinogens. They cause cancer. And so I'm glad that we were able to take very strong action on PFAS. Another issue that is very important when you talk about the environment, obviously, is the climate crisis. Our climate is changing. We see evidence of that all around us here in Minnesota, where both our winters and our summers are warmer than they used to be, and where we see more and more extreme weather events like terrible droughts. We wish it would rain right now, but also huge hailstorms that are driving up your homeowner's insurance premiums. If you're wondering why your homeowner's insurance is more expensive, it's because of climate change. And we took strong action on climate change this year. We passed 100% carbon-free electricity by 2040. So Minnesota, which has been a leader on this for decades, took another step forward to make sure we had carbon-free electricity. We also did rebates for electric vehicles and other incentives to allow for the transition to EVs, to make that technology more available to everyone. We also did a huge investment on solars on schools, which is a phenomenal thing on two levels. One, it gets us more carbon-free electricity on the grid, but two, it helps schools save money on their energy bills, which means more money back into the classroom. And then two other things I'll mention just for homeowners in the area. One is that we did invest substantial money into weatherization programming, so the ability to make sure that homes are more energy efficient. Energy efficiency isn't the most exciting thing. You're not going to see it on a political commercial, but it is something that makes a huge difference, not just for the environment, but for your home budget if you're not spending as much money on your heating and cooling bills, and we're going to make it easier, particularly for low-income families, to weatherize their homes. And then we still, unfortunately, have a lot of homes in Minnesota that get their water through pipes that are made of lead. And we know that that is extremely hazardous to human health. It causes irreversible brain damage in children who drink lead-infested waters, contaminated waters. And we made a significant investment in replacing lead service lines to help make sure that we're not poisoning children with lead. So a great year all around on energy and environment and the climate. And I bet you Jim's going to agree with all of that, too.
Well, thanks. It was a historic year.
Yeah.
And, we spent a lot of money. And so this is like the one time to get all the money. So there was an $18 billion surplus. You probably heard that. Ordinarily, we budget and we get by on $4 billion or something in new spending. And that is, through all the debate of spending, that's a pretty common increase. And so, 18 seemed like a lot to me. Back to that math thing, it seemed like way more than the 4. And through various mechanisms, fees and taxes and so on, were raised close to another $9 or $10 billion for something in the range of $26 billion or so in new spending. And so if you're looking for the gauge of success and how much we spent on everything, it was a historic year, and hopefully it will be amazing. I hope it is. And so part of the spending that got driven this time was because of COVID money that was one-time money that people began to rely on. And so now we needed to have that become permanent money. But because the spending there was so much one-time money, we had to create, my gentleman to the right and others, had to create more ongoing funding to cover the things. And so I hope it was prudent. I'm concerned about that. Because there was a good deal of one-time spending, again, in this budget that people are going to begin to count on for the environment and for education and other areas. So when you raise expectations, it's hard to lower them again. And so that's my concern. I'm glad about the lead pipes. I voted for the environment bill, coming and going, both. There were 3 of us on my side of the aisle that voted for it, Senator Coleman and Housley as well as I. And I've always been really quite green and interested in chemicals. As a chiropractor, I care about mycotoxins and all that. So it's been a big deal. It's been a natural fit for me. We discussed a little bit about the renewable energy standard. And you know, we remodeled the building to make into a charter school. And so my builder guy moved the stairway from where we had it architecturally drawn to where it went. And I said, why'd you move the stairway? He says, well, just because you draw it doesn't mean you can build it. Turns out there was an I-beam in the way of where we had drawn it. So he had to move it, and he just did the right thing. The renewable standard, I hope it works. I pray it works. I'm all for renewable energy. But today, Anoka Muni is at 42%, Connexus is at 40%. They have to be at 100% by 2040. And nobody who works in any of those places thinks it's going to happen, that it's going to be possible. Talking to my good colleague here, Senator Friends and others, oh, don't worry, it's going to be fine. The difficult takes a while, the impossible takes longer. I propose that we lease for the munis. For Excel, they have the ability to buy their credits and all that, but the munis and the co-ops really don't have the size and the capacity. So I suggested, how about if they get to 80% by 2040 and 100% by 2050? And that was declined. I think that we're going to need to do that, so I'm just cautioning you with the celebratory stuff about that. Then I suggested, well, how about if we allow that at least when they go to the PUC, they have to go to the PUC now for a very limited amount of reasons why they cannot hit that target, or they'll be fined or be forced to buy credits, which will get passed on to pretty much everybody watching this show, because that's where we get our power out in this neck of the woods. And we got it, and so that was declined in conference. I said, well, let's at least do a report to see how it's going. Unanimously, the Senate passed it, didn't quite make it back out of conference. And so how do we make it really work? How do you make stuff? You listen to everybody, and then you make a prudent decision. And I appreciate the excitement about 2040 and what it represents, but I hope it's doable. And I hope it's not doable at the cost of requiring that everybody's electric bills go up an amount that they weren't counting on. We still have many seniors on fixed incomes. The COLA that's coming next time is not going to be like the COLA now. And so anyway, that's just, again, I'm going to tell you, working together, you can get a lot done. I favor divided government because then you're forced to have discussions, and iron sharpens iron. I think some of the best work comes out of that way. But I'm still cheering that the reassurances that my good friend has given me about the 100% by 2040 are going to come true. So go for it.
Thanks to both of you for sharing those insights. We're going to shift now and go to question and answer time. And we're going to begin with legislation that aligns with the League of Women Voters' longstanding commitment to civic education. Because, as you know, we're all about voting. We're all about voting and helping people of all ages understand government and the voting process. This year's legislation mandates that high school students complete a class in government. Many older adults assume that all students learn civics in their K-12 years. Have things changed? Why and how did the legislature look at this as an issue?
You know, I can
If you want to talk to the history,
go on. Yeah, Dean Erdahl, 2 words. Dean Erdahl is a good friend of mine. He's a rep, and he's a history teacher, and he's been realizing the gap all along. And so the thing used to be, are you smarter than a 5th grader? Really the question should be, are you smarter than a new citizen? And so many people do not know their history. And with all the mandates that you've had to pass certain courses, that one's kind of fallen off. And I supported that pretty strongly. I think I was a co-author even over the years. It was controversial, and some mandates are troublesome. There's quite a few mandates in that. historic education bill, I should mention. Hopefully they're good ones and they work. They are going to cost some of that money. But this is a mandate that I supported that made sense. And so the key to protecting our democracy, which is really a republic, is that you have an informed citizenry so they can make good decisions. And so they can choose wisely and send both of us back because they realize it's good to have people like us doing that sort of thing. Or not send us both back because they realize we're really not at all what they had in mind, but they have to pay attention. So that's why I'm glad it's there.
Yeah, I also am really glad that we did the civics requirement this year. I had voted for it in past years when it was on the floor, and I was glad to see it happen this year. But I thought you did a great job talking about. I totally agree the test should be, more than what a new citizen does. That's phenomenal, well put. But I think that I just wanted to mention we also did a couple things that will I think help with young people's engagement. We are allowing young people to pre-register to vote. So you can't vote until you're 18, but we passed a law this year to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to register to vote. So that when they turn 18, they can vote. And I think that will be a really great thing, that as you're learning about civics in school, that you can take a civic action of actually registering to vote. We also did pass automatic voter registration this year, which is really great. So when you move and you change your driver's license, you will automatically switch your voter registration. And I think Minnesota has a lot to be proud of here with our nation-leading voter participation rates, and I think we just enhanced our status as being a great civic-involved state this year at the legislature.
Thanks. We're moving to an environmental question now. We've been learning a lot about water lately in League of Women Voters, and the differences between groundwater and surface water and aquifers and all the different systems of water that make our lives possible. The League has supported having a groundwater specialist for Anoka County to coordinate efforts to manage water wisely. Right now, those efforts are sort of disjointed between different agencies. Likewise, on a statewide level, how about getting all of our waters controlled by one agency? What do you think about that?
Well, in the land of 10,000 lakes, we have probably no greater asset than our abundant water, and we need to make sure that it stays that way and that it stays clean. And unfortunately, too many of our waters around the state are impaired, and you don't have to look very far. The Mississippi River, as it flows through Anoka and Coon Rapids, is an impaired waterway due to agricultural runoff in the Crow River. It's a massive undertaking to try and clean up the mess that we've caused in our water, but we need to do it. It's important for our kids and our grandkids to enjoy the same Minnesota that we've enjoyed. And I certainly would be supportive of helping with a local person in Anoka County to work on this issue with our local waterways. I know that I was walking along the Coon Creek there, the trail along Coon Creek, and was looking at some of the improvements that are going in kind of over by, in between New City Hall and Old City Hall for Coon Rapids folks. They're putting in some new buffer lands, which I think is really great to get Coon Creek in the right direction. So those little local planning projects are important. I'd be happy to support that. And on a statewide level, I think anything we can do to put more focus and attention on the water issue, I think is a good thing. And so be happy to have conversations about how we can best make that happen.
Senator Abler?
Sure, and that groundwater specialist came up, a month or so ago. I don't remember when but I thought, I just didn't know we didn't have one. Like, why would we not have one? And why would that not be something that we as a county would have? I mean, if we have to pay for it, we pay for some. The county is frugal, but there's some things we could spend our money better. If you were, I would certainly make that a priority. I tried at one point to put the Department of Health in charge of water testing over the Department of Ag, and the House and Senate killed both bills the same day. There's a lot of controversy in who runs the water, but I think as we move along, especially with the drought that we're having, but there'll be regular years coming, but it's one of the most essential things to live is to have water that's clean. And as we deal with the PFAS and all the contaminants that are leaching their way down, it's a big deal. So I think it would take leadership from a governor to make that happen, because it's going to be very controversial, and the ag people are going to be concerned about it. And I think, again, if there was, I'm not sure if a task force is how you would go after it, but that would be the way to start. We get all the voices together, and you might find a point of consensus. And you start out with and so the compromise we did, you're around there, Kathy. Howard Swenson and the ag people, they just gleefully, and they killed Becky Laurie's bill the same day. They were just so happy. But at the end, I found a way to let the Department of Health use existing wells to test water. And Becky said, "How did you get that done?" I said, "Well, I just listened to the concerns of the people, and we found a way to get some testing done where we could at least advance the cause." Anyway.
Okay, another big picture question about environment. What is your stand, each of you, on sulfide or silver mining near or in Minnesota waterways or on native lands, considering all the Enbridge pipeline breaches? That's a big question.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I am a co-author of a bill to ban any such mining in the Rainy River watershed, which would prohibit the Twin Metals project. I think in some cases, it's just crystal clear that the danger is way too high, and we just need to completely take it off the table. I think broadly speaking, I'm not a hydrologist, I'm not a geologist, I'm not a scientist of any variety. I'm a prosecutor in my day job. You don't want me making scientific decisions. You want the fine hydrologists and other experts who have spent a lifetime of study in this area making decisions like that. And I want to empower those folks, make sure we have the highest standards. And I'm not speaking about any project in specific when I say that. We just need to have the highest standards to protect our water and our environment across the board, and then allow the professionals to do their job without politicians trying to come in and get projects permitted that clearly the due diligence has not been done and the work has not been done. So trust the science, as they say.
And I meant to give a shout out to Lonnie McCauley, who was the little voice in my ear perpetually about clean water. And I still hear her voice in my ear and miss her being around. So just kudos to, bless the people who she loved and all that. But so she was just on and on talking about that forever, and we were good friends anyway. And so I'm not a fan of Twin Metals. It concerns me greatly. I'm not very trustful of any of those big companies. But I do want to caution you all, if you have one of these, you have said we need these rare metals. And so where are you going to find them? Is it going to be in some open pit mine in China with people who are dying or mining the ore there, or someplace else where there's less respect? We have to find a way to do what we need to do safely. And like Zach said, I don't know what that is, but I do know by virtue of the increasing demand for all these things that we are saying we need it. And so it seemed to me that the Dayton and Walz administration would have been a good place to start with a thoughtful, careful look at this. Because it's going to be mined someday. And that's my cautionary note to you all. So anyway, thanks.
Okay, so we do have a couple questions coming in on the Zoom from our participants at home. The first one is from Joan Molinar, wondering about the environment and referenced aquifers earlier. And so she's wondering, with the drought going on right now, is there a better way for the state to manage and plan for avoiding those droughts, or for doing things in the years that have a lot of water so that there's less of an issue around the drought? What can you tell her?
I just read an article about McDonald's apparently has some very fancy French fries. And the farm that makes McDonald's potatoes, or the group of those, just overdrew 6.3 billion gallons or whatever of water, and which is amazing. I'm like, huh? I mean, it's just, I mean, back to trusting big companies sometimes. And it's just who do they think they are? They had a permit for a certain amount and they didn't follow it. And so it's controversial, I know, talking to some of the farmers about water and so on, but I think given how it is, in Colorado, they manage water very tightly in the mountains and everywhere else. And so even though we have a ton of it, I think we need to be smart. And the whole point of an aquifer is it kind of stores the water. So I'm afraid that, especially as the population goes, Blaine had a big issue about taking water they weren't supposed to. Oh, we didn't know, and I don't know. I think a group like this is a great group to have that discussion and filter those ideas up, and I think it needs to be looked at. And then back to your idea about running our water, if you run out, it's just not a good thing. Write that down.
I'm glad you brought up the story about the potatoes, because I was thinking about that too, and it is outrageous. And it's actually, I think, part of a larger trend of ideas. You know, we have all this water in Minnesota. There's other places that don't have a lot of water, and it's no surprise that the places that don't have water are looking to take our water, whether it's to make potatoes, or there's frequently proposals for bottled water plants that want to set up shop here in Minnesota. There's even kind of crazier ideas to divert Mississippi River water or take water out of Lake Superior and ship it out west. And you know, just to be clear, I'm a hard no on all of those schemes and fantasies. But we should expect more of them, and we should expect more of this because our climate is changing. In Minnesota, we are going to be, all the models tell us, both wetter and drier. What do I mean by that? I mean that the average time will be drier. There'll be fewer rain events, but when they come, they'll be more severe. And unfortunately, it doesn't just balance out because those aquifers, those storage tanks that Jim was talking about, you know, if all the rain comes at once, it doesn't end up in the aquifer. It ends up in a river flowing down to the Mississippi, down to the Gulf, and we don't keep it. Aquifers have to build up over decades and centuries of persistent, moderate amounts of rain. So we are in real trouble if we don't acknowledge that reality and manage for it. And unfortunately, situations where you have companies violating the terms of their permit to the tunes of millions of gallons of water may cause irreparable harm to an aquifer if we don't take it very seriously. And so I hope we take strong action against those potato water thieves. And I hope that we're really conscious about the fact that folks are after our water.
Yeah, so there's a guy in prison. What are you here for? Oh, water. I mean, like, remember Alice's Restaurant, Mother Rapers, Father Rapers, stealing water.
Littering.
Littering.
More about water. The legislature allocated a little over $6 million to the MPCA to extend municipal water to all homes in the Red Oaks mitigation area in Andover. So residents with wells that aren't healthy are going to receive bottled water free of charge until the municipal water supply is made safe for them and connected. Do you feel that the legislation around that Red Oaks area matches the magnitude of the problem?
Well, no, actually, there's some homes nearby, and you look at the charts. We had 2 meetings here just a few weeks ago, and there's a new neighborhood that's because of the Superfund site. They figure has got the 1,4-dioxane stuff, which it's just so unfortunate. You buy a house, and then suddenly you can't drink the water, and there's almost 1 more year of water for those folks having to drink it till they get it done. We tried to move it through, and the political process goes fast sometimes, and other times not so fast. But so even the I think it was 6.8 or whatever it was, there's some other homes in that neighborhood that aren't going to be getting their water replaced, and I thought we should just do them all. And this is back to the question of when you're dependent on a well, you're dependent on a well. And so back to managing, back to 40 years ago, or there used to be tire piles out here, and in this now very nice city. And so there's a price to pay for that. There's a price to pay for. How come I'm talking about corporate greed all the time?
I love
what
it.
kind of Republican
I love
am
it.
I?
It's great.
And so back when they, the 6,000 barrels, was it, that were just a stone's throw from here that they had to dig out, they mined down, they found yellow and red sludge, and like, that can't be good. And so the wisdom of us now going forward is going to really matter. And just the thought I had so I know we need to it needs to be more, and the new neighborhood has to get covered as well. And it's not their fault. I think nobody's going to disagree that we should help them out in their time. This is a public problem. But I think if the climate really changes as Zach predicts, and there's wetter events and drier times, we're going to have to evolve some ideas about how do we capture that water when it comes. How do we make sure there's at least a good buffer so none of it runs off? You just don't put storm sewers running right into the river. You're going to have to have holding basins, the filter ones. And I think that's going to be another question of the day. And I think the young people that are learning in school about stuff are going to find themselves caught in this discussion. And I think we'll evolve, but it's going to be just different. And we evolved and we figured out. And anyway, thanks.
Yeah, I don't have much to add on the Red Oaks issue to what Jim said, but I do totally agree that when we talk about climate, we can talk about preventing change or trying to limit the amount of the climate change, but at some level, the climate is going to change. We've passed the point of no return on this, and so we need to talk about adaptation, and I think you have some good ideas there about trying to make sure that when we have those larger weather events that we are capturing that water, because that's going to be the new normal, and we have to find a way to adapt to that, even as we work to try and prevent future harm. And hopefully, people can look back at what we did this year around issues like PFAS and know that we are preventing some future situation like what they have in Red Oaks by not allowing the water to be contaminated in the first place.
Okay, now we have several questions about water. First one is from Diane, wondering about the lead water piping. And is there safety monitoring measures in place to ensure that this piping will not be replaced with a similar hazardous material such as PVC piping? And then she has a later comment about the PVC piping. So maybe if you could just tell us what you know about what's going on with lead water issues.
Yeah, well, we made a very significant investment. Jim kind of outlined earlier that the legislature this year, we had a surplus that had a lot of money that was just one time. And as Jim mentioned, that was due in part to the situation around the pandemic and the federal aid and a few other complex factors. So this was a good use of one-time money. It was to try and replace lead service lines for homes that are still getting their water through lead pipes. And the health effects of that are intense. I will admit that I'm not certain about the second half of the question about the PVC issue, but I can certainly look into that and get back to someone if they like. I certainly think it's important to ensure that we aren't just recreating the same problem with a new substance. So hopefully, yes.
Yeah, ditto. I don't need to comment on, he did a great job. I couldn't have done better, so way to go.
Okay, there are several questions about this issue. We're flipping back to education and police and schools. As of this taping, another piece of legislation is the center of intense discussion. The language that might seem to put additional limits on the kinds of physical interventions police in the schools can use when students are disruptive, destructive, or violent. What is your take?
You can go first.
Well, Coon Rapids first had a school resource officer in Coon Rapids High School in 1974. I understand that Anoka had school resource officers even earlier than that. I remember school resource officers, police officers in the schools from when I was in high school, and I thought they brought value to the experience of being in high school. I think that everyone agrees that safety at school is paramount, that we need to make sure the kids are safe at school. And I think that in our community, school resource officers, police officers in the schools add to that. And I've been working very hard with leaders at the state and the local law enforcement to try and ensure that we can get back to having those officers in the school. At the same time, I think there's a reasonable point to be made about making sure that we aren't using any tactics or methods with kids that could cause long-term consequences. So a long time ago, and like a decade ago, and without any controversy, we limited the ability of people at schools to use some of these methods. They're called prone restraints, and they involve things like, putting pressure on a student's neck or head. And we said that you can't do that for kids who are living with disabilities. And like I said, that was not a controversial thing when it happened a decade ago, and life has gone on without difficulty for 10 years. And so I think there were folks that thought if this is working for kids with disabilities, it should be the same for all kids. And I find it really hard to argue with that proposition that those rules should be the same, that we don't need to use these types of restraints. Now, we're hearing from folks at cities and police departments that there were some unintended consequences of that law. I don't really hear a lot of pushback on the idea about the restraints. What I'm hearing is that the bill created some complexity and ambiguity that causes people to have concerns about liability and risk with having these officers in schools. And so, cities around Anoka County, around the state, have made the decision to pull their officers. It's worth noting that a lot of cities have not. There are a lot of cities around the state that still have officers in schools, but other cities have made the decision that it's not appropriate. And I remain really committed to working with our local cities and work with the state. And I've had a conversation, at least one and usually multiple, probably every single day since this issue surfaced about 3 weeks ago. And I'm hopeful that we'll find a solution to it. And from my vantage point, every solution's on the table to get this done.
Thanks. So we diverge a little bit. Nobody should have a knee on a kid's neck. And so it's become like, should we have knees on kids' neck or should we not? That is nothing to do with this discussion. It has to do with a child with a disability back then, and if you can think what they would bring to the table and what some other intentionally misbehaving, violent student would bring to the table. A person with a disability ostensibly is unaware, or they don't need that. It's intervention that's just so overkill that you would never need to do it, or you should not be doing it anyway. It just makes no sense. So let's just get rid of that. But if you pay attention to what's going on in schools today and people on the street today, there is rank violence in schools and fellow students being beaten by 1, 2, or more people at a time. And it's a different world than when I went 30 years ahead of my colleague, happy class of 72. And so the world has changed. And there are teachers who are afraid, I mentioned this, to be in the hallway during passing times. That was never true when I was going to school. I don't think in 2002, when Zach graduated, that was any kind of an issue, because people just didn't do that. And so it's too bad you need to have a police officer in a school in the first place. Part of the issue is there's two sets of rules: when you're not being paid by the school district and when you are. And they're not trained for not being able to do what they have to do. A bear hug, or if you just want to, there's a kid acting out and you want to grab him and hold him till he settles down, that's prohibited under the language. The language is very poorly written. I was in the middle of this when it was being passed. It was a proposal from the department as part of their policy bill. And I talked to the commissioner twice about this. I talked to my fellow senators about this. And I said, this needs more work. The principals group was not listened to when this was being passed. The cities were not listened to when it was being passed. And so in the name of protecting somebody from whatever perils they might possibly experience, this was passed. But when this bill came to the Senate for discussion, there was 15 minutes allowed, pro and con, on a bill that had dozens and dozens of sections, many of which were quite controversial, including the whole racism part and ethnic studies, and whether we should have PSEO students going to Northwestern or not, and should we get rid of Tier 2 teachers or not. So it was totally inadequate, and this is what you get when you rush things through. If they would have simply had some meetings during the times when we were passing this, we wouldn't be here today. But right now, Anoka High School and 4 high schools in the Anoka district do not have SROs. Champlin does, because they decided they would do it. And so the police officers and the sheriff, Anoka sheriff's not sending their officers out. They don't do this to be lazy or chicken or not caring. They do it because they aren't trained to work in that situation. You can grab a kid by one arm, great, and then he's going to beat you in the face. And they are. So how do we find a way around this? And the suggestion I had was my evolved suggestion is, let's have a special session, put it off for a year, and then have dialogue along the way to remedy it, and let the SROs go back. And the SROs, if they're going to be a bad one, they know people are watching, and nothing bad will happen. But it's become political, and now it's tied to George Floyd, and this has nothing to do with George Floyd. And so unfortunately, it's a sensitized environment, but the kids are now at risk, and I'm worried about that. When they're in the school, they have expertise. They're likely armed, I suppose. And so somebody comes in and something happens, they can be right there. I talked to the captain at Anoka. He said he was an SRO back in the day, Andy Youngquist. He said there was 2 times in his whole career of being an SRO, he had to do anything resembling any of this stuff. Usually it's just talking them off the ledge. They get a rapport. They get to appreciate each other. They go, come on, Tom, what are you doing? You know. Anyway, so I didn't mean to go so long, but this could have been fixed, and it still can be. But when something tragically happens because one of those officers is not there, and so I was talking to my son who's a deputy. I don't mean to go so long, but I said, that's not a job I would want. And my son, the deputy, said, I would be that guy. And good for them that they are willing to put their life in that jeopardy for literally $45 an hour. But that's their commitment, and so I'm proud of that. But this can be remedied. It's not political. Let's just make it work. Let's make reading happen in schools. Let's get that new program going. And anyway, thanks.
Can I say just a little bit more on this subject? Because I do want to say a couple, and there's a lot of people out there who share the attitude that your son has, and that they should be commended for that. That's really wonderful. There's a lot of people out there who share that wonderful attitude that your son has, that I want to be there to protect the kids who are vulnerable, and that's really wonderful. And I want to just start by commending that. But I also do want to just let people know, because I think there's a few pieces of misinformation out there floating about this that I want people to understand. Some people are emailing me saying, well, now the police aren't allowed in schools. That's not true. Police officers are allowed in schools. They are in our schools. They're going to schools. If there is a public safety issue at a school, the Coon Rapids Police Department, the Anoka Police Department are responding right now. I've talked to the chief of Coon Rapids Police, who was telling me stories about police officers responding. So it's not that kids are unprotected at school. The question is right now about whether you have an SRO who is assigned to that school and is working in that school day in and day out, or whether you're going to have police officers who happen to be on duty responding to the school when something happens. I think there's a lot of value in having the SRO there, because they build relationships with students, they build relationships with staff. So I actually think the really missed value here with not having the SROs, the school resource officers, in schools is not that our kids are less safe, but that there's a less opportunity to build those relationships that give kids a positive experience with law enforcement, and give law enforcement a chance to interact with young people in a situation where no one's under arrest. And I think that's important. The other thing, and Jim, you may have misspoken a little bit here, but when you're talking about an officer not being able to, even an SRO, give someone a bear hug who's acting out, the language has a very explicit exception, which is that those restraints aren't prohibited if there's a threat of bodily harm or death to anyone. So there's no restriction. You could do that in a situation where someone is at risk of hurting someone else if it's necessary to do that. And that's clear. What I think the issue is, this is not a situation where you want any ambiguity or any miscommunication. You want everyone to understand what the rules are and what they can and can't do, because policing is already a difficult enough job, even under the best of circumstances. And if you don't have clarity, it can get bad. So we need to make sure that our officers, whether they're in schools or not, really, frankly, know what the rules are and really have one set of rules that apply more generally. And I actually think that was the spirit of what was trying to happen here. So what we're hearing now from police officers, and again, I agree with this, is that we have a problem where we have multiple different standards. If you're in this situation, you can do this. If you're in that situation, you can't. Well, remember what I said at the beginning. The whole point here was to take a rule that we've had for a decade for kids living with disabilities and extend it to all kids. It was to make it so that officers didn't have to think, okay, does this child have an IEP? What can I do versus this kid who doesn't? Let's make it just the same rule across the board. That was the intent. There clearly have been some unintended consequences, and we need to figure out a way to provide clarity to a situation that is right now not clear for some people, so that we can get those school resource officers back in Coon Rapids High School like they've been since 1974.
And just real brief, you're correct. If there's like a big fight going on and they're just thrashing on each other and there's a chance that somebody could get a concussion or something out of it. It's not the situation for a small fight where there's two people going at it. You say, you got to break it up. And the two teachers grab each from the back just to separate them. That's not allowed because you have to have severe bodily harm. And some kids it's an issue. And some kids in the meal hall throwing trays all around and breaking property and so on. It should have just been worked. They should have listened. That's all I'm saying. I'm not criticizing Zach, and I don't want to. We spent enough time on it, but this didn't have to get to here. And so, frankly, when one side doesn't listen to the other side, or when one side doesn't listen to anybody, you wind up with this. And if I wouldn't have been so deeply involved at the time trying to get a dialogue going about this, I wouldn't be going on about it. So. Anyway, thank you.
Maybe we can talk again afterwards and we can look at the language, because we have a disagreement here about how broad that exception is. My understanding of the language is that if there's that it says bodily harm, and bodily harm is really vague. I can tell you as a prosecutor, because that's in a lot of criminal statutes. I mean, really, very minor threat of injury constitutes bodily harm. So the scenario it's my understanding, and maybe we can look at the bill together and decide offline who's right and who's wrong.
Zach and I are going to work
But-
together and get this resolved. Isn't that what
He's
you
not-
want us to do?
you know, I'm talking about making
Thank you.
promises,
See, I got
yeah.
applause
But-
for us.
but-
Quit while we're ahead.
But yeah, okay, we will.
Quit while they're applauding.
Okay, so you've heard it here, so you can give credit to the League of Women Voters, all
That's
right?
right.
There you go.
They bring people together.
So we were waiting for questions to come in, and all of a sudden, a whole bunch came in, but now we need to wrap up, so let me just give a quick overview of a couple ones that came in here. They were talking about the National Urban Runoff Program. They were talking about things that people could do better in their yards to manage their land. But I think the most poignant ones were submitted by Mary Jo Truchon, another elected official who served for many years on the Anoka Conservation District. And she had a couple good points about city water plans, and I'll end with her point about wetlands are key to water quality and restoring water to our aquifers. And will the legislature oversee how the state agencies are protecting wetlands? Many citizens think the wetlands are in the wrong places. Any closing comments?
Why, this is the kind of discussion that's really good to have. We don't have to agree on everything to be agreeable. We don't have to believe everything to be believable. We don't have to, but if you can tell, we're all about making it better. And I'm convinced that more voices make it better. The League's voice has been amazing over the years, so please keep it up. Keep inviting us back. We can have these good discussions, and that actually I learned from these two, so thank you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much for hosting us. Thank you for the wonderful questions. You've given me a lot to think about and keep working on. It's the great joy of this job is getting to work with so many people who are care so deeply about their community and to try and work collaboratively to get stuff done. And I think we've largely been successful here in the northern suburbs about doing that. And so I'm happy to keep doing that. Look forward to seeing you all at the next one of these. Please do keep inviting us.
Thank you, Senator Abler and Representative Stephenson, for making time to talk with us about these important issues. We didn't get through all the questions, so if you have further questions, please contact the legislators directly. If you would like to know, viewers, more about the League of Women Voters, ABC, go to LWVABCMN.org. Beginning the last week in September, go to that same address to find taped interviews with candidates for school boards in Anoka, Hennepin, Columbia Heights, Fridley, and Spring Lake Park. That's LWVABCMN.org. League of Women Voters, going strong for voters for over 100 years.